Okay, so we are recording this session, and this is the session where we're going to be talking, reviewing your dream car assignments, as well as talking about some of the filters and the smart capabilities that Photoshop has when we're working with distortions and being able to manipulate the textures, the lighting, all the things that filters allow us to do to imagery. So what I'd like to start with is I'd like to have you share with the rest of the class your dream car assignment. And part of what I am expecting from these presentations would be your ability to organize your thoughts and present it so that whoever you're presenting it to, whether it's a class or in the future to a client, you've got this organized in such a way that they can keep up with you, as well as you're going to have that wow factor at the end. So if you start by showing them the finished product, it's almost anticlimactic when you get to that finished product. So I'd like to see how you actually present your assignment as well, because that's something that you're going to have to do with your clients. So keep that in mind as we go through this. It's not just to, let's see what everybody in the class did. It's practice. It's teaching you how to present, whether it's on Zoom or hopefully you have some other classes where you're presenting face to face, which is yet another tricky thing for most people to do. Okay, who would like to start?
I would like to, but I need to get in my other computer because I have another computer.
Okay, so
But
while
I
you're getting to that other computer, maybe somebody else could go before you.
I can go.
Okay, great, Calvin.
Oh, it says disabled participant screen
Oh,
sharing.
sorry. Yep, that's mine. It comes up that way as a standard in Zoom so that nobody can Zoom bomb you.
Should I just start off with the background I had from my car ad
Sure,
and then just work my way up?
great.
Okay.
Treat us like a client.
All right, it's just loading the screen share. All right. So this is the background I started off with for the car I chose, which was a Ford Bronco. I was
Okay.
having a lot of artistic art block when doing this project. So I thought I should just make it as simple as I can, because I had another design, but I didn't really like it. So to start off, I like this background, but I needed some place for the car to sit. Like it obviously can't sit at this slope or right here on this ledge because that'd be too far away. So I took another image and just cropped it in a way that made it look kind of like it fit into this image. But I did some adjustments to it, like some light, some color, some saturation. And then I added some personal like shadows to it that mainly reflect the environment around it. And then I added the car to it. And for the car, you can probably see it. It says Journey on the license plate, which is going to match the theme of the advertisement. I also have like some reflections in the side of the car to give it a more realistic approach. And then here's the one that like advertisement liner or one liner. It's about not about the destination. So sit back and enjoy the ride, which gives the, I guess, the feeling like this is a comfortable car to ride in as you're journeying through like a landscape like this, because it is a car that you would, not drive on like paved road.
Right, fun car.
Yeah. And then here's the Ford logo. They actually went back to like their 1965 logo, which is all right. I had trouble finding like the logo by itself, that was more accurate to the colors. So I just saturated it and made it like a little bit darker. And then I also put in my correction layers. So these layers helped to make the car and the cliff fit more into the background. And if need be, I can explain how these layers work, but it'll probably take a long time.
Okay. What comments do people have? What do you like about it?
I think it looks awesome. I really like, I think that the shadows you did work really great. Like it looks like it's just a normal photo. You did an awesome job of putting it in there. And it's funny because I also chose a Ford Bronco for this.
Yeah, we had like similar thoughts.
Okay. And I do like the fact that you got the windows. So the windows you can see through and see the mountains in the background. That's always great. And even if the other ones are tinted, we still have through the windshield the ability to see out, and it's not a full strength through that window because they're probably tinted. And remember that part of this ad was all about getting the point across that it is the journey to get there. And so having the license plate visible and illuminated, I think is a great thing, because by having that stand out, you could have darkened that up in some, but the ad is all about talking about the journey and making sure that they understand that this is a fun car, especially for off-roading or whatever. So terrific. I think that works.
I originally had it to this side like flipped, but then I
Yeah.
realized the Ford logo was backward.
Right, you'd
I'm
have
like,
to actually
wow.
flip that on the image as well. And the side logo, I've seen many times in ads where they flop the image without realizing that the logo has text in it and it just doesn't look right. Yeah,
Yeah.
good. That's good to be aware. Great.
All right.
Okay. Who else has theirs ready? Come on. Rabiel, are you ready? You on your computer?
I am in the other one, but I don't know if I did a good job.
Okay,
Let
just
me
explain what you were thinking and what techniques you used. Not necessarily, remember, if you're talking to
Yeah.
Photoshop people, you'll be talking about Photoshop things. If
Yeah,
you're talking to a client, you're talking about the feeling of the ad and the inspiration and why this is going to make the viewer think something. Good.
Let me see. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. That's my job. Professor, I don't know where I live, but I don't find the other everything, all the layers.
Oh, okay. Now is this, oh, this is a PSD. That's surprising. At some point, you would have saved your PSD as a JPEG or PNG because it was for a web ad, and
Okay,
that needs to have it flattened. But this should have all of your layers so that if the client says this is great, except too many exclamation points, we want only one exclamation point.
We cannot put it.
That's a rule that's out there for graphic designers. You're allowed one exclamation point per ad.
Maybe at the end, right there.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Oh, look the layer here.
Okay, there are your layers. Good.
I don't know how to explain that, Professor. Okay, I took this picture from the internet.
Mhm.
that I did, I make two background for the text, and I don't know how to explain because it was when I made it last week, this week, but in the middle of the week, and I don't know how to explain, Professor, everything I did because
Okay. What is your license plate mean?
what is it? Okay, I use one that you gave me.
Yep. And what does your vanity plate mean? What do the letters mean?
The letter?
Yeah.
Oh no, it's like when you customize your driver license. I for I don't understand if you need to put, maybe I don't understood if I had to give some extra information the driver license and the license plate. Just I thought that you can do a license plate, you can customize on your way.
Okay. And you can make a vanity plate. You can make your own. But remember, part of the reason you're making a vanity license plate is to deliver another message
Uh-huh.
using that license plate. So if it's quality or if it's control or if it's
Oh, oh my
sale,
God.
yeah. And so
Okay,
keep
now I
that in
learned
mind.
that.
Good.
Now I learned that because I just customize it with my name.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah,
Good. And let's see. Now, did you stretch this car?
just a little bit. Yeah.
Okay, and that's something that um, can't happen because something that's round, like a tire or a Mercedes logo, needs to stay round, or something like a car. If this was, you know, a Ferrari that's low and wide like that,
I
maybe
don't
that would be okay.
I don't stretch the car, just the picture a little bit.
And
The complete picture.
right, and the car stretched at the same time.
Uh-huh.
That license
Okay.
plate is definitely not a Massachusetts license plate. It's more of a European license plate.
Yeah, because it need to look like, I was trying to figure out if I do in the same way that the sport car use.
So you'd have to make this into a US ad versus a European ad.
Okay, now new for me too.
Okay, good.
Everything is new for me in Photoshop.
Okay,
But
that's
that's
fine.
why I'm here.
Good, that's good. You're learning. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah, now I know. Okay.
Okay, and I see that you put a blue background to extend the sky.
Yeah.
And I would say maybe blending the
Edge.
the Mercedes car image right along that edge. You could actually make a feathered section so that it blends a little bit more into the background, or a gradient in the background that starts at the darker blue color and goes
Yeah.
to your lighter blue color.
Yeah.
That's something you could think about as well.
Yeah. I was trying to give like a two tones, like when you
Sure.
see to the far, because you see here in this line, it's like when you have a little mountain, like a backland.
Okay,
You can
sure.
see that's why, but it's too far. And then in the sky to here,
Hmm.
you see. But it was a big effort, Professor.
That's okay. And this, like you said, you're learning. And so I see
Yeah.
a lot here that you have learned. And so I'm very happy with that. And it's
Thank you.
just taking it to that next level. And
Yeah.
so now every client, as soon as they see something, they'll love certain things. And then other things they're going to say, okay, can I see it with a different typeface? Can I see it with different colors? Can you turn it upside down and make it backwards? Whatever it is. And that's where having your layers is going to help, and not understanding that it's not art. It's not something that you're passionate about and you're so committed to that when the client says, I want a different typeface, you
Yes,
get
me
all
too.
upset because no, this is the best typeface for this ad. This is a typeface that Mercedes uses or something. What we need to do is understand that the client is many times right, but many times they're not. And if you can convince them that your option is better, great. But if you
Yeah,
can't, because it's not art is where you like it best. And as long
yeah,
as you're happy, it's perfect. In the case of graphic design, the client has to be 100% happy, and then
yeah,
it's correct. So even if
yeah.
you disagreed with the client, if the client's happy, it's
You
correct.
is right. I have another
Yes.
question, Professor. For I was trying for the text. I was looking for a specific category and I don't found it. How can I add them more to my list?
Okay. If you have fonts in your font library,
Oh, I need to download it.
you would need to download it, and it would need to sit in your system folder in the
Oh,
fonts
that's
folder.
why I was looking.
Good.
In,
And remember too that there are
thank you.
different types of fonts. Once you take typography class, you'll learn about true type fonts, postscript
Okay.
fonts, um, all the different types of fonts that are out there and what work best for, say, an ad versus reading. Typically things with serifs, the little feet that are on your text, they work better for readability. So we use those for like the body copy in a book. If we're using something for a headline on a billboard or an ad, typically we go with what we call a display font, which is more beefy. It's set apart from each other so that you can look at it quickly and read it fast. So if it's for a billboard, you're probably going to get 2 or 3 seconds of a driver's time. So it needs to stand out. So many times having thin and thick make it a little tricky, and having serifs makes it a little tricky. And so you'll learn all of that in the typography class when you take that, what some of the best fonts to use or the styles of fonts for different things.
I was trying to do another kind of look to
Mhm.
those the take control here. You see, I was trying to figure out how to make that those letters is like how say that circle
Okay,
a little bit fat, but I didn't found it. I look at the internet everywhere, but
good.
I saw people doing tutorials, but they already have it.
Right. And
Then
so
yeah,
typography class and page layout class even will help with all of that. Typically, remember what I said during the text class or talking about text, you only use it as a last resort. And so in the case of a web ad where we're trying to make it all in one image, we can use the text, and it's going to be 72 DPI, and it's just going to sit as one combined flattened file. However, if this was going to be for something, a cover to a book, all of this text would be done over in InDesign because it will give us much higher quality text, and the pictures would need to be higher resolution as well. Okay.
thank you so much, Professor.
Okay, sure. Who else has something to share? I know Josh is without internet today, so he's not really on the computer. He's just using his smartphone. Sophia, do you have something that you could share?
Yeah, I can share.
Great.
So I definitely missed the how to do the license plate, like for the ad. I just kind of did my name. So I missed that part. But yeah, I try to go for something more sleek. Other like Calvin's was really cool because it was more of like in the mountains and stuff. But I don't know. I did like I think I also chose like a newer one, so I wanted to be like I don't know, more like sleek and stuff like that. And then I put the little like Bronco logo, and I did it in Illustrator and put it in there because I really love that logo. And yeah, I don't have it in Photoshop right now, so I can't like pull out the different layers, but
Okay, what's everybody think? What do you like about it?
I like the sleekness and how it's very like kind of dark at the bottom, but then the light as you go up towards the picture, it's like it gets lighter. The only thing I would say is like the built and while can be pushed in a little bit more because it's like it's really at the edge.
yeah, you're right. Yeah.
But I do like how you did the forward. You wrote forward in like that type. It's very, very sleek and it goes for like what you wanted.
Thank you.
And it's true, when we look at something, remember in the Western Hemisphere, what we typically read is from left to right, top to bottom. And so having it light and filter down into a darker, it actually leads your eye. It seems more heavy at the bottom because of the darkness. And it makes that headline, "The Built Wild" at the bottom, pop off of the ad because it's darker there and you've got a white version there. So it's great. I like that. And I think that does what it's supposed to from an emphasis and a flow of what you look at first and then where it goes. Something you should, in the future, as you're doing ads and things, typically showing it to at least 3 other people and showing it for like 2 seconds and then putting it down and asking them, what do you remember? Because that's where their eye went first. And so that's what you're trying to do, is deliver a message. Think about somebody flipping through either a digital magazine or a hard copy magazine. What is going to make them stop? Or what are they going to see? And if they see that it's 2 facing ads, what is the component that you do want to deliver that message? So keep that in mind when you're showing someone. You're really trying to prove that, yep, you did your job. You got them to focus where you wanted them to focus.
Mhm.
Okay, good, great. Broncos. It's funny that they even brought the Bronco back and now everybody's loving it. It's a beefy little car. Okay. Anybody else have something they want to show? Okay. Well, I do want to make sure that we get through everything that we need to today. And so I'm going to skip forward to the next section. All right, today's we're going to talk about filters. And to do that, I want to upload a file to you. So in the chat, I'm going to put a image that I'm going to use for showing filters. And I'll tell you why I'm using this image. So you're welcome to grab this, and let me share my screen. Now, filters. What are filters? In Photoshop, we have a whole menu up here called filters. And what the filter is doing is it's altering in these different pixels. You're able to add textures to an entire image or to a local, a subset of your picture. You can do distortions. You can do lighting changes. Remember all of those logos or the headlines we wanted to stand out? That would require maybe darkening up a corner so you can put a white logo, or lightening up a corner so you can put a dark logo into the ad. So filters allow us to do that.
I have a
Sharp,
question.
yeah.
Sorry, and
Nope.
sorry because
Go ahead. Yep.
okay, when I was trying to do my assignment for the picture I took, okay, the face, it was with too much light. I was trying to figure out how to put the face in the right way, how it need to be. and for me it was too difficult. I can't.
Okay, we're going to go through some of that today.
That's
And so,
what we're gonna learn today.
yes, I'm going to
Okay,
help
thank
you
you.
with some of that, hopefully.
Thank
And then towards the end, if we haven't covered it, we can just work on that one-on-one.
Oh,
Okay.
they are pictures that you cannot save it if even you try the best on Photoshop, or you always can save it. You always can fix it.
Not always fix it. So say the face in the museum picture,
Yeah.
that one, I would have
Oh.
gone back. And I think in many of the comments, when I grade your pieces,
Yeah.
I try to
you
use,
told me.
yep. And so I will say that one, I would have told the photographer to go back and reshoot
Yeah.
it because
Thank you.
he blew out the highlights is what
Yeah,
we
too
call it.
much. Oh my
Good.
God.
Okay, good. All right. So remember that filters are adjusting an image. Now, just like when we did color correction, if we cannot destroy, we don't want to have destructive tools in Photoshop. However, the standard in Photoshop is to change the pixels right away. So if you go into color, remember color was color adjustments, and all of these tools will change the pixels to lighten, darken, make them more vibrant, change the color families, all of that. But when you pick it and say save, it alters those pixels. If we did it as a layer adjustment, same functionality right here, but it's not going to be destructive. Same thing with filters. We can make our images smart filters. So if we try to convert to a smart filter, in this case, sometimes it will not work on a background if it's locked, just so you know. So they want it converted to a smart filter. So now notice that it has a slightly different icon down here. And what a smart filter allows us to do is work on this image and save all of the commands. Think of it doing 1 or 2 or 3 different filters, but it never says the final flatten or go do this. It's still viable. We can still edit it. The only issue we have with the smart filters and smart objects, there are some things that we cannot do with a smart filter. If something's been applied, a smart filter's been applied. So if I put a smart filter on this image, I may not be able to go in and do retouching to this image. Notice it comes up with the no, I'm not going to let you use the brush tool. That's because the brush tool doesn't have a non-destructive capability. It wants to change the pixels and it's going to be forever. So it can't work with the filters that are non-destructive. So you're first going to have to flatten it, rasterize it, implement that filter. You're going to have to do it to the pixels. And then the only way to get rid of it would be to go up to your history and undo whatever you did with the brush tool to get to that. So, oh, and by the way, this is where we had that little snapshot I was mentioning before. As we do something, if I click on the snapshot tool, notice it made a little layer here. I could go up and name this snapshot filter 1 or, noise filter. And then once I go on to the next filter, I can do another snapshot. Snapshot 2 could be light rendering so that I get the darker edges on my image. And so you could save all of these, and then you can go back and forth between all of them and see what different layers, different tools were used. So it's just another way of doing almost a history but it's just taking that little snapshot as you go through. Okay, now I mentioned I wanted to share this image with you. The reason why I have this image, and you need to really think about this, when you're doing filters, there are so many options to filters. There are so many things that you can do with filters that it's almost overwhelming, and you can't learn by just trying it once and saying, now I know how to use this light rendering filter. You have to experiment. You have to see what it does with solid color areas. You need to see what it does with highlights, saturated, things that have fine detail, things that transition slowly like these clouds, things that are vertical, things that are on the diagonal. This image to me is a great image to test different filter effects, because it's going to show me, I love what it did in the clouds. However, I hate what it did with these derricks over here. So you need to find an image that shows sharp, smooth, saturated, light areas, dark areas, to really see what the filters do. Because if you find just a flat color area like the beach scene here, it's probably not going to show you a lot of the functionality of a lot of these filters. Okay, so now I mentioned that filters. Here are some of the filters that it allows us to do. Blurring filters. Look at all the different ways we have of blurring pixels. Photoshop gives us not only a generic Gaussian blur or smart blur. Those are the two that are most common with these. Blur, blur more, or average, those were what Photoshop started with. They were just real basic. So if I go into blur, poof, it just did a blur. No menu, no anything. Command Z undoes it. If I go into filter, blur, and say, I'd like to see a Gaussian blur. Gaussian means more in the middle and then feather it out on the edges. So with the Gaussian blur, it gives us this little window. Seeing something at 100% is always great, because this over here is at 50%. So I'm not seeing every pixel when I look at this. But now as I look at the Ferris wheel, I look at the texture that might have been in the beach, 3.5 pixels might be too much. It makes this look like it was just out of focus. And if that's the effect you want, great. But what we're really trying to do maybe is just get enough that it sharpens it up a little or blurs it a little. We may want to get rid of some kind of an effect there. And so I can see a preview button, turn it on and turn it off, and see how much it's doing. In this area right here, this window, it's showing me at 100% what that blur will look like. Remember, less is more. If you're using these filters and you're saying, well, I don't know if that did it enough, step back one step. You can always go in and increase it. If you start with the most and then you find that it hurt a different area of the tonal range, that's not going to help. Now that was Gaussian blur. If I look, we also have in the blur a smart blur. This was Adobe's version of adding some more. So it has the radius, the number of pixels. So if I put that down around 1 and look at this Ferris wheel, see what it's doing. But the quality, high versus low, medium, and then edges only. So blur between contrasty areas, or just do a whole blur to the entire thing. So if I do edges only, it might do something like this, whereas overlay an edge might do this, or normal will do this. When I'm using these in here, notice it may be using some of the standard or the colors. So several of the filter tools use whatever your foreground and background colors are using. So as we go through these, if you come up and see that it's tan in one case and it's black in another case, it may be because you have tan and black in your foreground and black background. With a smart blur, it shouldn't be that way. Now a threshold, what does threshold mean? Threshold means where does it start working and where does it not work? So a threshold of 25 may say you have to have enough of a difference. If I'm doing high quality and edge only, you have to have a sharp enough edge. This is saying not a very sharp edge. This is saying a much sharper edge. So you can see that it's not doing as much of this tool as it's doing. Now, we have all of these different things here. These were the original Photoshop capabilities to do halftones. I want 8 dots. Have you ever seen Roy Lichtenstein? His artwork did a lot of cartoon type things and overdid the halftone dots. And so what they did was make these cyan, magenta, yellow, and black halftone dots, trying to make it look like a cartoon. And so this function, filter, pixelate, and halftone, actually makes this look like it was a printed halftone. So I'm going to take that back. Render. When we use render, we have something lens flare, lighting effects. Yeah, okay. And so as we're doing some of these, this one has a spotlight effect. And so I can use a point, and this point is in the middle. And so we need to, let me see, there is a way to adjust where that point is, and the exposure, the gloss, metallic, all of these different things. You'll notice that it's really giving me a lot of different functionality in this menu that's popping up here. The only problem with this is I have to try to do many of these functions myself and really see how they work. So unless you experiment with filters, you won't know how they work and when you use a tool, what it's going to do or how it's going to do. So cancel that. Let me see. Even with the blurs, we have a motion blur, a radial blur, a surface blur. So a motion blur might give us, when I put in a large distance, notice what it's doing. It's making this single thing, this tower right here, look like it's moving, almost like in an earthquake or something. And I turn that on and it's moving back and forth. So if I went in and did a separate layer with this image and then superimposed this other one on top of it, I could get a blur function in the background with the solid tower in the foreground on the top layer. So
Perfect.
yeah,
Maybe we can use the function for simulate speed in a car. Yeah.
most definitely. And when you look at some of these blurs, you may have radial blur or a surface blur. They will give you some of those effects. And so even sharpening or stylizing and diffuse solarizing wind. Wind is a great one to show what it's going to look like. And you notice this menu doesn't show it over here. There's no preview button. So this is a real old function inside. But up here, it's showing you what it's going to look like. And so this is making this building sort of have tails on it, left to right, depending on how you want the wind to go. And when I say okay to this one, notice it's now looking. So if I superimpose things on top of this, the original back on top of this, it would look like we've added tails, or maybe on a motorcycle that the motorcycle is moving, but the background stayed the same. So keep in mind that we have lots of these. Now, these are the standards that Photoshop started with. Then they realized we should actually look at putting all of these into one menu. So that's what is called the filter gallery. The filter gallery lets us look at many of these functions. Now, the only issue is, notice that this image, Daytona Beach, is a red, green, and blue. As soon as I go to my image mode and make this cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, now when I look at the filter, notice several of these are grayed out. The whole filter gallery is grayed out. These functions in here, many of them I can do. They are not grayed out. That's because they will work on a cyan, magenta, yellow, and black channels, a 4-channel file. If I go back to red, green, and blue, just delete the CMYK option. Notice my filters now come back. I still have filter gallery, but that's because my channels are only 3-channel. The functionality that Photoshop or Adobe created was for red, green, and blue files. So you have to convert it to red, green, and blue first, and then you'll be able to work with these filter galleries. So let me show you some of the different filter gallery elements. And I'm going to zoom. You'll notice here, these are a lot of the different functions. They put them into categories. So if we wanted an artistic dry brush effect, we can look at this. If I want to see more of the image, I can see the whole image. Fresco. Now, here's one of the issues that we have: the underpainting, overpainting, glowing edges. So it's doing all sorts of other things as we're working on this. And this is why, again, I tell you that it's tough to predict what it's going to do. And now this is giving me these black and whites. It shouldn't actually be that way. So I'm going to cancel this and put in my standard tones down here. And now let me try this again. See if filter gallery will still be, this is using a black and white version of a lot of these things now. So you can see that a photocopy, this makes it look more like maybe if you put it on a bad photocopy machine and it put it in here. Let me see. No, this shouldn't. Mosaic tiles. We're getting some color rendering here that I don't want. So I want to see what I did to this image that made it. It shouldn't be showing me that all of those colors. it should be allowing me to see this in, nope. Default. See if that helps. Nope. Okay, I'm doing something crazy here. This is showing me a lot of the different filters, but it should be doing it to the actual image. This is almost giving me an inverted image. And so there's something that I have flipped in here that is wrong. And I'm not sure what I did. So anyway, I should be able to see this image with those filters on there. So let me see where my functionality is gone wrong. Nope. Okay. Anybody that has, I will figure this out before the end of class to see why it's showing that the way it is. Okay, so another piece of filters before we go too much further. Notice we can convert something to the smart filters. This is where we're going to be non-destructive. And so if I go into smart filters, to enable and re-edit smart filters, you're going to have to convert this back into a raster image. But now that I have this on here, I can go into the filter gallery and work with it. Again, these are not the mosaic tiles. This color palette, I need to understand why this is doing this. So if I look at color, I have no idea why this all of a sudden has broken. Okay. In the past, it used to be just these two, but now I have a feeling it's allowed me to alter this with different swatches or different colors. I'm not sure how to get out of it. I broke Photoshop. Anyway, one of the other functions that we have is liquefy, and I'm going to upload a different image. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to upload an image that definitely needs a little liquefy. Normally, I haven't had a lot of use for liquefy, but I'm uploading a picture of an older woman standing, looking out at the ocean and really appreciating it. So what I'd like to do is show you the liquefy function using this one. Now, this woman could be one of my relatives because she has this hang down thing that we all have in my family. And so ultimately what we're trying to do is limit some of this. And so the liquefy function, filter, liquefy, and you'll notice anytime I click on one of these functions, that brings us into a new menu. These
Professor, your screen's not shared.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Okay, hold on. Let me get to Zoom and share my screen. Thank you. Okay, so when I click and have a function like liquefy, these functions up here were actually plugins. They were done by other people, other programmers, maybe other than Adobe, or they may have been Adobe programmers, but it didn't fit into their current menuing system. And so in this case, Liquify was another add-on function that you could get outside of Photoshop, but then it allowed me to work as a separate window. And when I hit save, it saved it back into Photoshop. So this Liquify has all sorts of different functionality. I look at this menu down the side, and what we have is the ability to, say, rotate something. I'm using 175 brush, and it's twirling this. If I hold my Alt or Option key, it twirls it the other way. I can turn some of this. If I use a much bigger brush, I can turn the whole thing. So everything that's in there, you can see I can distort this. The reset button is not working. Usually when you hit a Alt or Option key, your cancel, which means get out of this menu and don't implement anything, it turns it into a reset button when you hold the Alt or Option key. When I click this, it's not taking it back. So something, either my computer has really decided to play games with me, or there's some things in Photoshop that aren't quite.
That was happening to me the other day, and that I did was I clean my work area.
Yeah.
I just reset it, and then
Okay.
I restart it again.
Okay, interesting. All right. So anyway, I'm going to cancel this. Hold on. Let me get my menu off of there and cancel this, and then go back into Liquify just so that it's working as clean as possible. These functions here are ways. This was the twirl. This one is bring something in. So if I needed to make her waist smaller, we can pull things in. If we needed to bloat, make her head bigger, and notice I can make the, from the center, it's making it bigger. If I hold the Option key, it goes the opposite way. But once you've destroyed the pixels or altered them, it's still working on those. Those are the bloat and the constrict, twirl. Some of these will be the way that we can protect some of the images. I can, let me, almost like that smudge tool, we can twirl this or move this to one side. Okay, almost make it look rubbery. These down here protect certain areas. So now if I go into the rubbery tool, it will work outside, but it won't work where that red area is protecting it. So that's the mask. If I go to the erase the mask, I can get rid of that mask. So I'm going to come back in. Now, I typically don't spend a lot of time on Liquify because we really don't do that much with Liquify. But as I'm working on this, let's say I wanted to thin down this hang down part of the arm. Just by using this function, which moves pixels, if you're going in one direction, it will move it to the left. If you go down, it will move it to the right. So if I come over here, this side I went up. This side, I'm going to come down. And so I'm moving those pixels. But if I come back down, you notice it's adding. If I go up, it's thinning it out. So we can do something like that with this functionality pretty easily. you can really, I think the first class, we looked at how we take that model and manipulate the model, making her thighs thinner, making her breasts larger with the bloat tool, making her waist smaller with the constrict tool. All of those things are things that we, from an ethics standpoint, need to understand and make sure that we're not going too far. There are other things that we can do in here with our mask, add to a mask, take away from a mask. So actually looking at all of these different functionality and trying them is the best way you're going to learn how to use these tools. Okay. So I'm going to say okay to this. Now, there's another function that I'd like to just introduce to you. Much like the liquefy, you're not going to use it a lot, but every once in a while, you're going to say, that would be great if I could do that. So let's select, do an object select just on this woman. Let's see if the AI in Photoshop will find her. Great. So we made a selection using the object select. And now if I go into something called Puppet Warp, so edit, Puppet Warp, there's also a perspective warp if we're trying to look at using something that's in perspective. So Puppet Warp, notice it only happened where I had the selection. So if I just want to affect this woman, I can do that. As a matter of fact, I probably should have duplicated this layer first. So let me stop that, and I'm going to duplicate this layer so we can see what it is. And as I work on this, if I go back into Puppet Warp, notice we have a grid pattern, a geometric overlay. These areas that are intersections, I can manipulate with the densities, how many, fewer points, more points. If I bring this up, is it going to work just on this area, or is it going to extend outside of it? Show the mesh, what we're seeing here. And you'll notice when I'm using Puppet Warp, it gives me this little tack. I can come into this tack and say, this area, maybe where her elbow is, I'd like to put a point. And then maybe down on her hand, I'd like to put another point.
I have a question, Professor.
Yeah.
Instead of the whole body, just I can select like an arm and then work with puppet.
Right.
Okay.
And this grid pattern that you see on here, that's one of the things it's allowing me to do. So when you see that this blue is selected, that means that that is what I'm going to select and move. That, but you also see that it's pivoting around the other points. So if I put these here and then I put a bunch of other points on this, we would also be able to work with that. Now, if I came here and activated this, as soon as I come outside this function and hold the Option key, it gives me the ability to rotate. And so if I rotate, notice it's using that as my pivot tool. So what I would need to do is look at the point, go outside, and then pivot these where I want them. And so if I held other sections to where they were, I can start moving things, either moving them or rotating them to give me a different perspective. I left the other image underneath so you can see what it is I'm doing. Now these two are pinned here So they are almost like you put a nail down or a tack, so it doesn't want to move those as much or at all. So it lets me pivot from here to here. So it depends on how many of these pins I have and where they're placed. So you would need to work with these to understand what it's going to do. Okay. And so I can put pins back in here and bring things back into where they should be. So if I just wanted her to raise her arm, I could do that. Now, I know we still have another, you still have another tutorial to do. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Puppet Warp or Liquify. So if you wanted to do a tutorial on them, you could find something like Photoshop Training Channel and how to use this Puppet Warp. And notice it's taking this guy right here, and it made him look like this. Move his arm, his hat, this arm went up, this leg went behind. So if you do this tutorial, you could actually see all the different functionality, understand all of these. I'm going to show you at the bottom a nice feature, or this is another great thing. There's a software program out there that allows you to do this. And notice this is before and after. If you're trying to show somebody the work you did in Photoshop, wouldn't it be great to have a slide that says, this is what I started with, and this is what I ended up with? So this functionality in here of the before and after split screen is a great way to show in the Puppet Warp that they move this leg, they move this arm, they move that hand. Again, this is a great image for doing this. It's not always going to work really well for you. So if you're looking for another tutorial, maybe looking at this Photoshop Training Channel and just going through their video on how to do this, and pick your own image or use one of their images. Okay. All right. Questions so far? All right. Again, Liquify is great. So is Puppet Warp, but you have to work with it to really make it look real. And remember, as you're squishing something or constricting something or bloating something, it's stretching those pixels. So it may be, if you have fine lines like these in this, these derricks, or this area right here, these diagonal lines are really going to be crazy once we use a Puppet Warp or a Liquify, because it may not be able to handle these thin contrasty areas. Okay. All right. Good.
One of my tutorial, it was using those techniques. You remember where I took my picture and then I made a cartoon?
Okay. Yep.
Yeah, using a lot of those techniques.
Okay. Don't save that. Okay. So, here's, I want to figure out why anyway, okay. I'm going to upload another set of files to you. Stop share. And well, maybe first of all, I'll do this and then I'll show you. I'm going to show you this screen. Okay, so let's say I have these two images. I have this gentleman on the phone, and then I have this car. If I want to put this gentleman in the car to make it look like he's in the car, one of the issues I may have is, remember, this windshield has some reflections to it. It has some tonal value differences between no glass and glass. Typically, if you have glass, it's going to be a little blurred out behind it. So if I were to take this gentleman, and let's just take a piece of him now, so I can bring him over. I don't know how much I'm going to need of him. So I'm just going to take this and put him over here. And notice we had a major resolution difference. The car is very small when it comes to pixels, number of pixels. In the case of this gentleman, he's a very high res image. So as I start using this, I'm going to zoom him down to the size that I want him for the car. Maybe he's about here. I could maybe use a little bit of the opacity just to see what he looks like. And he looks like about the right size. I'm going to say that that's the right size. Now I could layer mask this gentleman, and quite easily, once I have the size I want, zoom in, layer mask, and with my layer mask, start saying, okay, I'm going to get maximum, get rid of him, smaller brush, get rid of the background of this image while keeping the image there in case I needed to go back for some reason and do something with it. But getting him to be behind here and behind the steering wheel. So if he's in here, I do this a lot tighter and maybe a little more. But let's say that he's back there.
Look like magic.
Okay. And if I went across this by accident, remember, I can still go back to the white on my layer mask and bring him back in. Now, he's solid. He's 100% opacity. I may need to change the opacity slightly to make it look like he's behind the glass. Not too much, but you want to get some of this reflection in there. You want to get some of that. We also have the ability to say, he's pretty sharp, whereas maybe the rest of the image isn't as sharp. So again, on this layer, we may want to go into our filter and go into blur. And let's look at our smart blur. With the smart blur, I need to see where he is. There he is. I can see what's going on. Now, this smart blur is not actually showing me a preview. Let me see if the Gaussian blur is going to do that. It may be, okay. So with the Gaussian blur, I get a preview. And so I'm wanting him to look just slightly blurred. Maybe this is a low res now, 1/10 of a pixel. I can see before and after. It's just slight. If I went up to 1 whole pixel blur, he may look too blurry compared to the other image that I'm putting him in. So less is more. Bring him down and say, okay. Now you'll notice Gaussian blur, it did it to the pixels. So the only way to get rid of it is to delete this function. If this was a smart object or a smart filter, I could non-destructively do this. So once that's in there, I may also have to do some color correction. So even just getting it so that I'm working on just this image, notice that it's working on both of these. So I may want it to work just on this layer. So by clicking this button, it indents it, and my color correction here, levels, is only going to work on that element. So if I want to lighten them up, darken them up, make him look a little washed out because he's behind the glass, I can do that. So before and after. So it's all about being subtle with these changes. And I could go in and fix up my layer mask a little bit more to make sure that I'm not carrying something around him. Up here, I could even, as I'm doing the brush, make that 50%. Maybe his head should be behind this. So I'm going to change that so that it's more of the car than his head up here. Okay, so I'm able to work with two different images and merge them together using multiple functions, whether it's blur and filters, it's using the layer masks, the opacity. All of that is something that you need to figure out how to do. So I'm going to give you a couple more files. And in this case, let me see if I can get all of these at once. I'm going to upload 3 images to you. We've got a picture of a lioness jumping off of a tree, a lioness walking across a path, and zebras drinking in a stream or a puddle. What I want you to do is put maybe the reflection of one of these lionesses into that puddle where the zebras are. So open your zebra image, and then with those two lionesses, figure out how you would introduce them into this picture of the zebras, which is their arch enemy, and figure out how to get a reflection. So between now and maybe 2:05, 2:10, I'm going to have you work on that in Photoshop using the different tools, the filters, as well as the selection tools, merging tools, and maybe layer mask tools. Okay, so between now and then, you can have a break if you need it, as well as work on how you would merge these cat pictures with the zebra pictures, or one of the cat pictures. Okay, good. Okay, if we could come back to class, turn your videos back on, and let's see what you came up with for this little project with the animals out in the Serengeti or wherever they are. Okay, so who has something that they could share with the class?
I can share.
Okay, terrific.
Okay, so I just took I made the message I was trying to go is like the lion and zebra are like friends instead of hunting them. It's like the Lion King. But so for this lion, I took a basically selection of this object selection, and then I edited the selection or added onto it because it would clip off some of the paw. So I just added some of it. Then when I got the selection, I created a copy of it. So it's now on a new layer that I can just it's basically a way for me to save the selection quicker. Then I drag this file over to the reflections, put it right here where I thought it would fit best because I wanted to get the whole body of the lion instead of it being like a crowd. And then when I had that, I played around with the curves adjustment layer, try to make it look like it fit in a little bit better, tone down the lighting, and then I create a copy of it, flipped it vertically, and then put it somewhere in the water. And with this layer, I decreased the opacity by like a tiny bit, just to like get this bluish tint of the water. And I played around with the mask. So I used, I don't know if you can see it, a soft brush with 47 opacity and flow of 17% to give it a nice blend into the water. So it wasn't too harsh. And then I added a Gaussian blur of like 3.6. And then for this one, I basically did the same thing and added the Gaussian blur.
And some opacity changes. Yeah,
Yeah,
great.
65%.
That's great. Now, obviously we have lighting issues that with the image that's there, where the light is coming from, where the light's going, what's in shadow, what's in bright light. And so all of that would be things that we could also work with filters to adjust. But most of the time, it's probably going to be using some of our adjustment layers. So I think you did a great job with this. And now the selection of the first one, layer 2. When I look at layer
this
2,
one or the lion?
let me see.
'Cause
Nope, not that one, the other one.
okay, so lion 1.
Okay, lion 1. When I look inside layer 1 and I see layer 2,
Oh yeah, this one.
yeah. If you had you did that with a selection, which works great. But once you do that selection, one of the things that we always want to remember is the ability to get a little bit of a feather along the edge to make it look kind of like the feathering of a natural photo of the zebras to their background. You want to have the feather around that lioness or the layer 2. You can do that either inside a layer mask or when you're making your selection. If you're in the right tool, you can actually do that feathering there. So I'd initially look at the zebra picture and see how much. So if I zoom in on one of the zebras to the background, you can see how much of a blur goes around the edges of the zebra to the background. So it may only be 2 or 3 pixels. But by doing that, then your lioness, you can make sure that that has 2 or 3 pixels of blur right along the edges. And if it's an automated function, it saves you from having to go around the whole edge with a blur brush or something like that. So,
Yeah.
but that's great. I think looks good. I like your creativity on getting them both in there.
All right. Thank you.
Did anyone else come up with anything different you want to share? Okay. By using the tools, remember, using the tools makes you more of a master, makes it less of a task to figure out how to do something. You're starting to use those tools either through the tutorials, the assignments, or just working on it yourself. That helps. That helps a lot. All right. Good. I did figure out what was going on with my filter, so I'm going to talk a little bit about those. So I'm going to share my screen and put the Daytona Beach image back up on the screen. So I mentioned when we look at a filter, when we look at the filter function, if I want to work globally on the whole image, I can do that right from here. Typically, I try to make a duplicate a layer just so that I know that I have an extra version of something if I really go way down the path and then realize, no, I don't want to do that. And maybe I've saved it along the way. Put that extra effort into making a copy of something or doing a snapshot. At this point, I could work on a filter and work on the entire background. So if I came in and said, I want a filter on this that is water paper, which makes it a little bit fuzzy, I could do that. And if I don't want as much contrast or more contrast, less brightness, more brightness, the fiber lengths, how long those little extremities are going to be. So this is one way I can work on something, and that's going to work on the entire image. So now the entire piece has that extra little furriness to each of the components. If I do a Command Z, I can get rid of that. If I come in and make a selection, and let's say I only want to do that to this area of the picture. So using a selection and a filter gallery, I can do the same type of thing, get a little more of that effect, but notice it's just inside the selection area that it did it. This component is still the same. However, it was destructive. It worked on this image and it changed those pixels. So as soon as I hit save, it's going to be very difficult to get back to the original. So Command Z, get rid of that change that I made. Now, oops. If I come in and make a selection like I had, but this time come into filter and say convert for smart filters. It says, by the way, to enable re-editable smart filters, the selected layer needs to be converted to a smart object. Okay, so now this is a smart object. I have my smart object icon. And when I come in here to do this change just inside of that selection, I can pick this water paper and make my change. Say okay. And notice it did that in there, but notice what it did for my layers panel. The layers panel shows a layer mask and a filter gallery function. So when I click on this area that we're working with, and let me see if I can go back into Let me see what my properties is going to show me about this. So I have this area, embedded smart object. And so if I needed to edit this, I can convert it to just a layer. And as I'm working on it, I can still go back into filters and rework this to change what I have and say, okay. So now it's adjusted that. I can even go back in and take one of these off, take one of these on. Come on. Click on that so that it will show me what that layer is doing, and then change that. Okay, so I can use selections, but if I do it with a smart object, it is creating from your selection a layer mask to work in. I can always go back and remove that layer mask as well. So if I didn't want that on there, we can disable the smart filters. I can disable the smart or change this back from a smart object as well. Okay, so all of that is something we need to understand, that if I then rasterize this layer, it's going to take all of that functionality and implement it. The reason I would do that is so that I can use some of the retouching tools. The brush, the clone stamp, the healing brush, the smudge or clone, no, the blur tool over here, the sharpen tool, or any of these dodge and burn tools will not work if it's that smart object. Those have to be rasterized at the time that they're used. So it has to be converted. Now, let's go back and talk about those filters. So if I go into filter gallery, which only works on red, green, and blue files, 0. We have all these different types of brushes. Now, before it was showing me, it was not actually, it was showing the image like this. This is something new that Photoshop has put in here that I had never seen. This glowing edges, whatever this functionality is, I can turn it off and turn it on. Right here, I can add multiples together. So if I click on, I want a spatter effect, now that's what's there. I could add a glowing edges. In the past, you could only add one filter. So this is something new in this version of Photoshop that I just hadn't seen or didn't see in any write-ups. So figured it out, and this is the way that I get my actual colored image and apply the filter to that. Spatter. Spatter has functions to get a lot of spatter, a small amount of spatter, a smooth spatter, or a random grainy spatter. All of these are things that you may find are useful in one specific application and not another. Accented edges. How wide is that edge going to be? How bright is that edge going to be? I cannot really give you all of the understanding of all of these tools because you have to experience them. Glass to flow, sketching something. And remember, we can, if this is negative, we can change that when we go out of this and do an invert with our color correction. So if this looks like a negative now, I can swap that. Let me see if I cancel this and even do this. This may be one of those places where okay, so it's not looking negative necessarily anymore. It's looking positive. It's just looking dark versus light. Okay, so you will be working with all of these, whether you want it to look like stained glass and have a smaller stained glass or a larger stained glass, mosaic, textures, crackle feel to it, like an overlay, graininess. All of these things you will need to work with. Okay. That was in Filter Gallery. Remember, we still have other ones out here. So if I want to change something into a sphere, I can do that in here. And notice it made it more of a fisheye. See, let me show that one more. A fisheye effect is going to make the center closer to you and out at the edges further away from you. So it's trying to make it almost look like it's a fisheye lens. Okay. Sharpening. We've talked about the sharpen tool, but remember what sharpening really is it's using contrast. So in an image like this, where I have several areas that have lots of contrast, if I bring this way up, it looks like I've increased the sharpness of this to make these areas stand out. But what it may be doing is adding what we call peaking or rimming to something. What do I mean by that? If I zoom in, notice what it did to this image. It found a transition point, a dark to a light transition point. And then it made the dark side darker and the light side lighter. And it pretty much put a little stroke in there all the way around the edges of anything that was contrasty. It, in fact, is very noticeable. So this is what we call peaking or edging. We don't want that effect because it will stand out in the long run, and it may even pixelize more than anything else because it's making that contrast area even less of a tonal transition. So I would suggest even not using necessarily this sharpen edges, because sharpen edges doesn't, excuse me, it doesn't give me a menu to use. And if whatever the last function you did, the last filter, it will be up here, and a Shift, Command, or Control F will continue to do that function again and again and again. So if I wanted to sharpen edges again, Shift, Command F, oops, is it? Yeah, Shift, Command F should be sharpen edges. Why is it telling me to fade? Well, my quick keys are not right either. So if I keep doing sharpen edges on this, notice what it's going to do. It's giving me that same effect, but when I zoom in, it's pixelized like crazy because it's made it very contrasty. Light areas got lighter, dark areas got darker, and it really does not make this picture look sharper. It makes it look more pixelized. Okay.
Professor,
Yeah.
if we rasterize that after sharpening, it can be fixed,
If you do what?
Rasterize.
If you rasterize, you actually put that filter change into it. So it will not be a smart filter or a smart object anymore.
Okay, okay,
It changes those pixels forever.
okay. Rasterize mean you change it forever.
Correct. It
Okay,
puts it back to a normal layer, and then you can do other things like the retouching tools to it.
Okay, because I used to use too much rasterize, but now I know.
Okay, good. And experimentation is going to help you with that. Something else, noise. One of the functions that we have in here in noise is despeckle or dust and scratches. So let me zoom in to show you. If we have specks on the ground here, the sand with little rocks or pebbles, if I go into filter, noise, despeckle, it will blur this out just slightly to try to get rid of some of the graininess that might be there. Bring that back. If I use the noise, dust, and scratches, what that will do is it will look at an island. So if I don't have any, if I have a 1 pixel contrasty area, so a black dot with a sand color or cream colored around it, it knows that that little island, it can swallow up with the cream color. Or a black area with little dots of white, it will also swallow up that island with black. As we move this up, notice what it's doing. It's really just blurring any of those areas. I can change where it's going to affect by using the threshold. Okay. And the amount that it's going to affect. So dust and scratches, you want it to work, but in most cases, it's not really going to. There's going to be other things in the picture that have small areas of detail, like these little dots of sand here, that might be in other areas that you do want to keep. So you may have to use a selection or a layer mask or a filter mask to get to just the areas that you want to work with. So keep that in mind. Noise. See this add noise function. Add noise is like static. And when you add noise to something, I don't know if you can see, I'm going to bring it up so you can really looks bad. But this noise is giving you a random overlay of static on top of your image. Now, this is obviously too much, even with the Gaussian, a different distribution of this softening on the edges, it's still not going to help. But there are times when if you have a very smooth transition, like a gradient, if you create a gradient that goes from 50 to 60 in tone, you're going to have this perfectly smooth transition. Most real world images don't have a perfectly smooth transition. So it may try to band that gradient. It may try to make it into a chopped up area. Putting a little bit of noise into something like that helps. If you had a moire, that undesirable pattern, sometimes adding the slightest amount of noise to that will help to break up the moire so you don't get a very strange pattern on there. Okay, what other ones do I really need to show you? I'm going to let you, for your assignment, you're going to be doing a lot of these. extrude, if you're doing blocks, it's really kind of an interesting effect that you can get with this. We talked about a 3D effect. It makes these little blocks depending on the color that's there. So now I've had many students say, okay, this would look great as an oil painting. So we can come down and say, okay, I want to work on the oil paint function. Where is it? Stylize oil paint. I want to make this image look like it was done by an oil paint. Problem is, it almost doesn't really look like an oil painting. It's maybe a Van Gogh of some sort with weird swirls in it. But playing with all of these functions, I still can't necessarily get it to look like a real oil paint or textured paint. So you are going to say, I want to make this an oil painting, or I want to make this into a watercolor. So one of these, where is watercolor? One of these is a function, distort. Where'd watercolor go? Water paper, watercolor used to be in here. I swear they took it out because it didn't look like a watercolor anymore. But there was a function in here that was watercolor, and it really doesn't, watercolor, one of the things, if you've ever done watercolors, it doesn't look, you have no real black, dark, it's everything's kind of pastel. And so in this case,
Oh, Professor, the watercolor filters at the top of in artistic.
is it, oh, maybe there it is. I can't find it because my menus were in the front of it. Sorry. So if I go into the watercolor, I don't know about you, but I've done some watercolor, and this doesn't necessarily look like watercolor to me, especially with the blacks. And so you have to think about the shadow, the amount of textures that you're doing, the brush details. You may, in fact, start out by washing this image out using a adjustment layer and getting those shadows so that they're not as dark. And then you come in and use the watercolor function or one of these other sponge or smudge stick or whatever some of these dry brush effects would be. And by doing that, you're using two functions together, but now it's looking more like a watercolor because I don't have these blacks. Maybe I start by first going into image adjustments, changing my levels so that I don't really have a black anymore. Say, okay, and then go into my filter gallery and try doing a, come on, watercolor. It's still giving me a dark because I want to get rid of some of that. So once I get here, maybe that's when I come back into an adjustments and have to adjust that, the shadows, and try to get rid of some of those shadows. Oof. Cannot do it. So I've never actually liked the filters thinking that they are actually watercolor or oil painting or any of those, because they're really not the effect of a true watercolor or oil paint. So beware, you will want to go in and just use a filter to fix the image or to make it artsy looking, and you will be able to get a different style, a different look to an image, but it may not be a watercolor or an oil painting. All right. Does that make sense? Okay. Now what else? Duplicate animals. Okay. Oh, something that I wanted to remind you about. When we're using images, we can size an image, and we've learned how to use the size function and change the size, change the number of pixels in an image, change the resolution of an image. However, when we're working on an image, if we want to extend this, say beach over here, we want to get a little bit more to this image. I may need to extend this. That's called, remember, the background is a canvas. So if I go into image and canvas size, this is changing the size of my background layer. It's not changing the size of the image that's on the background layer. So as I say canvas size, it says, where do you want to add more canvas? So I'm going to say, keep my current image over here in the center. And then if I say I want the width to be 8 and maybe the height to be 5, it's going to add 1/2 inch here at the top, 1/2 inch at the bottom, and about 2 inches over here. And typically I can make this white, black, or other. Okay. So I made my canvas this much bigger. I did not size my image up on the canvas because maybe I wanted to extend this. So if I come in here and say from right here, I want to take this and I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste it back in. I've now added this little strip in here, but you can tell I'm just repeating it. I may also want to do a transform and flip this horizontally, excuse me, vertically. Image, transform, vertical flip. So now it kind of looks like, move that down slightly so that it's, oops, I picked up some of the white when I picked it up. So I have a white line there, but now I would go in and adjust this anyway with retouching or somehow blurring this. Same thing over on this side. I can come over here and say, copy this whole section of this. Oops, have to be on the right layer. Copy, paste that in. And when I move this layer, if I want, I can flip this one horizontally and get it so that it looks like a big, now I'm getting kind of a pattern here, but I would just break that up using my clone stamp tool, maybe change some of these clouds so that they don't look like an exact duplicate. But by making my canvas bigger, it gives me more room to add something else into my image. So remember, canvas size is different than image size when we're working here. All right, so that's something I wanted to double check that we covered, because I don't remember covering that. And flattening. When we have layers, right now I have several layers here, and then this background layer. If I wanted these to be in one layer, that's when I have to flatten. If I merge down, that means wherever I am in my layers panel. So if I said merge down, layer 2 and my background layer would merge together, but it would leave layer 1 as a separate layer. If you had turned off an eyeball, taken this one and turned it off, so I'm not looking at that. Now if I say merge, oops, merge the visible, what did I do there? It's not letting me merge the visible. There it is. Merge the visible. would not merge layer 2, but it would merge layer 1 with the background layer. So keep that in mind, that there are a lot of these other tools here that just make things easier for you in the long run when you're working on something. Okay. Before we get into the next assignment that I wanted to talk to you about, another tool or functionality inside Photoshop. This course isn't long enough to cover everything and show you all of the different functionality, but there are certain things that as you go forward, you need to know that they're there so that you could then do a tutorial and figure out how they work. Some of those functions are here under scripts or automate. And when we do something, PDF presentation, that kind of makes sense that you can make a PDF out of this and multiple steps. Creating an action, windows and an action. So there's a panel for this. And what an action does is it records different steps. So if I had to increase my canvas size, change the background to a blue, and paste in something else, if I created an action, I could list that here and then say, do it automatically to the picture that I have open. So here are some actions that Photoshop, standard default actions that they give us. Let's say I want to create a vignette or a gradient. If I pick this and then I just say play, Command Feather is not currently available. So it took this top section and it just did the gradient or whatever layer I was on. Let me bring that back. Okay. Let me find sepia tone. And I'm going to this layer. Sepia tone is making something look old. It's that orangish brownish look. So if I look at this, it starts by taking a snapshot. It makes all the layers visible. It desaturates, so it makes it a black and white. And then it does these corrections to the hue, saturation, and brightness. So if I select sepia tone and then hit the play button, it made this into a sepia tone. It did all of these steps. And what I love about the actions that this creates, it always starts by making a snapshot of where you're starting. So if I had to go back to the original, I could. Or I can come back to the sepia tone. I'm going to revert this just so that we're not getting mixed up here. Okay, so actions, they give us lots of actions. Some of them are very helpful. Some of them, not so much. Wood frame, making a 50 pixel wood frame around this picture. It just made it look like there was a frame around here. And so it used filters to do this. When I look at my history, it used a fill, it added noise, it added a motion blur. So those are all filters to create this frame around the edges. If I come back to the snapshot, it gets rid of all of those. Now, the reason why I'm showing this to you, these are default actions that you can mess with. We have some textures. If I wanted to make neon rubber bands, I have no idea what this is going to be. Okay, it made it look like little neon rubber bands. Isn't that weird? But okay. The place where I find actions work the best, these production ones. If you have 25 pictures and they all have to go from 300 pixels per inch to 72 pixels per inch for the web. If I came in and they had to go from CMYK or red, green, and blue to grayscale, I could just pick this and say, do it. So now it's grayscale. And it will even give me this color mixer if I start there. If I needed to change something to a medium JPEG that was a high quality JPEG, I could pick this one. And now it's going to save this to my desktop as a different file, a copy, at a quality level of 5, so that it's going to be a smaller file. So these are production capabilities that really could help a lot, and make your canvas size bigger, make a canvas size smaller, make it the old monitor size, 640 by 480. Here's an action in here that I downloaded from the web, and it's going to do a lot. Hopefully. So this actual action does probably 200 different functions. And look at my layers panel as it's doing this. It's making copies of different copies. And if it gets to a point where it doesn't know what to do, it pops up and says, do you want this or do you want that? So in this case, I'm trying to make this picture look more cartoonish. And this is just an action that somebody recorded all the steps that they would put onto an image to make it come up looking like this. And the last one, the last step they did was to put this text on top of here. So I always just take that text layer and get rid of it afterwards. So this is what it did. It even put a little white border around the edge, but it has all these different layers in here to make this effect look like it was a hand-drawn piece of art. But all this is recording all these changes to your picture. Look at all the different things that this person did. And the way that you create this is, see these buttons down at the bottom in the action panel. If I say I want to create a new action, I'm going to call it, I don't know what, I want it in my regular default actions, but I'm going to call it action 1 and start recording. And once I have this, notice the record button is going. Anything I do after this, image canvas size, increase this to 8. Say okay. So now I have extra canvas size. That it's recording. When I'm finished, I say stop recording. Now I have action 1 that I could open any image I want, play action 1 on it, and it would increase the canvas size. So again, if you find that you're doing the exact same thing, let's say you took pictures at a company function or a wedding or something, and they all need yellow taken out because of the sodium vapor lights that they have in this function hall. Once you figure out what color adjustment you need, why should you have to open every single image and do that color adjustment to all of them? Set up an action. The action will say take 25% yellow away from this image in the midtones. Save the action and then open those images up and just play that action on there. Especially if you had 3 or 4 different color corrections that you were doing, just to get it back to a normal looking image. Now, that was an action. An action is working on one image. Over here in File, Automate, a droplet What a droplet does is it uses an action. So I'm going to save this droplet on my desktop as a variant. It wants to know, what action do I want to use? Any of these actions that I created before, maybe or using the sepia tone action. So I could save this on my desktop as sepia tone. And there are a bunch of functions in here that you can look at. What's it going to do? Where's it going to put the resulting file? I could create a folder, put a new one in, create this. But let's say I say, okay, on my desktop, let me see. Hold on 1 second and see if I can find it. Now that I have all this nasty stuff on my desktop. F11. There it is. I'm going to bring it over here and bring that back. Notice this little function right here. I don't know if you can see it, but that's what I just created. This little function that sits on my desktop, because that's where I told it to sit. This is a droplet. I can take an entire folder of information. So let's say I have the folder here of the African images. If I take this and put it on top of this action droplet, it went through and did everything it needed to do to those functions, and it put them onto the desktop as new files. But all of these images are now sepia tones. So depending how I set this droplet up, it would create a new folder, put the lioness, both of these pictures, and the zebra into that new folder automatically, and it would put the sepia tone on top of that. So keep that in mind, that what we're trying to do is make Photoshop do what we want it to do as efficiently as possible. Yeah, I could open up 100 images and do the exact same function to all 100 images, just change the resolution. Let's say that going from 300 to 72 for the web. I don't want to open up 100 images, go into image size, change it to 72, say save. That's a pain for 100 images. Create a droplet or an action and then a droplet. You can take that whole folder of 100 images, drop it onto the droplet, and then it will save all of those as a new file. If that's how you set up your droplet, save a new file in a new folder, and you're done. So that's one more function that we have at your disposal. What else? We know about contact sheet. So there are some others in here that I've never even had to use, but you can add automations and scripts just like you can add plugins. So keep in mind that if you're doing something in Photoshop and you're doing it over and over, there's probably somebody else that's already created an add-on little program that makes your life so much easier using Photoshop. Okay, and it would be a plugin that might show up here, and you can go out and browse plugins. Let's see what comes up when I browse plugins. These are all plugins that I can add to Photoshop. I went out on the web and looking at this, if I want to add a QR code to something, if I want to, let me see, skin beauty retouch, so smoothing out skin. There's a lot there. If I get it and it's free, it will just show up in my Photoshop right up here, because it puts it into my Photoshop system folder in the plugins folder. Okay. All right. Did I lose you? That makes sense? Okay. Let's talk about the next assignment. The next assignment is going to be, if I go into Photoshop, if I go into Blackboard and look under the assignments or under today's folder, you will see that you have a file called easel and an instruction sheet. This is going to be what you need to do next for your next assignment. So when I look at this instruction sheet, you are going to be using a lot of filters. And you're going to be taking that easel picture and creating a shadow. So we'll talk about that. But the first step is to actually create 47 different images in a folder. Each image is going to be a different filter. So I mentioned that only you can really learn how to use the menus that come up with each filter. I want you to go in and try 47 different filters. It doesn't take that long, but it should take longer than just going in, use a filter, use a different filter, use a different filter. I want you to learn what those menu options do. Do they add rimming to something? Does it add color to something? Does it take textures and add them or take them away in a certain part of the tonal range, just in the highlights, just in the shadows or midtones? So you need to figure out how it's going to affect an image. So you are going to find the perfect image. To me, my perfect image was that Daytona Beach image. Why? Because it shows all the different, excuse me, it shows all the different types of things that I can do with filters, or different textures and different contrast, smooth, sharp, saturated, highlight, shadows, midtones. So you're going to find your own image that you can do these filters to. And then you are going to make, let me see, you are going to make 47 plus the original. So you're going to have 48 different, and I'm looking to show you an example. Okay, here's an image. And notice the first part of this assignment is going to be taking one image and trying 47 different filters to it. Here's photocopy. Here's patchwork. Here's what rough pastels looks like. The stamp tool, a bas relief. So the same image, you're going to do 47 different, you're going to put those all in a folder. And when you put them in the folder, you are then going to use that contact sheet 2 function to make 4 different pages, 12 to a page. So that's why they're 48, your original, and 47 filters. And at the end, you are going to have an example of what each one of those filters that you tried looks like. And the way that you're naming each one of these, you're going to name the file the type of filter that you used. So if you used the glass filter, you're just going to name that file glass, fresco, film grain, so that when you print it out and it does your contact sheet, it's going to print the name of the filter right underneath the picture. So by the time you're done, you should have, hold on, 4 pages of filters that you can look at and determine, okay, this is the type of outline, black and white, that I want, or I'm looking for something more that has graininess to it, like this sponge filter. Okay, so keep that in mind. That's the first part of this assignment, testing it. Then you are going to pick one of those images and filters, and you are going to take the picture of the easel. And let me open the picture of the easel. Where is it? You are going to take this easel that I have, separate it from the background, and notice it has no art on it. You are going to take your filter that you liked and put it onto this easel. Now, if you have a landscape image, one that's wider than it is tall, you may have to extend this picture and put it here. If you have a portrait image, you could just make a selection here and say, I'm going to place this inside here. Now make sure you understand what you're working with, because if I do this correctly, notice these brushes are in front and these little pegs hold your canvas on here. So you would need to make sure when you're making this selection that you also include those two little pegs and the brushes as part of your selection. Oops, I'm doing the opposite. Okay, so need to include those. And when you're looking at it up here, make sure you're getting your shadow and all of the background. This is where you're going to put your filter. And then you are going to take this easel with your new artwork and you're going to place it into a different background with a shadow. So you're going to have to come up with this. Now, why don't I show you some examples? So hold on a second and I'll throw some examples from past classes up here so you can see. Okay. All right. So here's one where the student took a picture of Great Woods, or whatever it's called now, down in Foxborough, that area, this music venue. And whoops, cancel that. He took his easel, put that here. And let's see. So here's the easel. Oops. And the shadow that goes with the easel. He also put the painting onto the easel. And you'll notice he took this little piece up here and just took it out, put his painting there. And it's kind of funny. He had these big Trinitron screens. So he put his original artwork up on the Trinitron as if he was painting what was going on here at the concert that was also coming up in the monitors. So this is the background, and he put that in there. So that's one example. Here's another student that took their filtered piece on their easel, created this, and let's see what the shadow looks like in this one. So they added the shadow in this. You may even be trickier because you have to get it to go along the stairs. So in fact, this one probably should have bent a little bit. That's where you could use that warp, the puppet warp, because that would actually able you to take this shadow layer and make it straight down, go across, straight down, go across by putting in those pinpoints. Here's one where this is the picture that they had. Then they had a picture of the dogs, and they're noting where the shadows are in the original, and they're trying to add these. I probably would have left the easel and shadow as separate layers so that we could then maybe mess with the opacity on the shadow without messing with the opacity on the easel. So again, that's a good reason to keep separate layers. This one I thought was interesting. The student found this picture of this wild bed and windows out there. They came up with this easel. He put a picture of the Matterhorn or some kind of mountains range, shadows there. But what I thought was interesting is this is the original view outside of the windows. He decided to take his picture and put it in these floor to ceiling windows to make it look like that's what they were painting. So that was interesting. This one added the filtered image here, but I think I probably mentioned that I liked Mad Men during the class. And so he put his easel in the bar with the Mad Men. And interesting, just a little shadow there. Okay. You getting the idea of what this assignment's going to be? So took a fall scene, did a filter to it, put it on the easel, then put the easel, little baby easel, inside a train.
Which one are we gonna send you? This one or?
You're going to send me.
Yeah.
We will talk about that in a second. Here's another one with a woman with her animals, and she just put it here. Big long shadows because the picture had big long shadows. So you need to, this one couldn't decide. So she took all the pictures, a lot of pictures of her dogs, and put them up on the walls in this room because she just likes her dog so much. Okay. Same thing with the cat. So this cat, my favorite part of this little cat is the beret. She put a raspberry beret onto the cat. And so most of these, she put one image here, another image here, another one here, here, here. Let me see if I look at this. So that one's up there. Cat on the easel. Here's another cat. And this is the original. So you can see that she even added her cat to the chair. And I don't know if it had a beret on or not when it started. Interesting. Okay. More, couldn't decide which filter, so she added a few with the other filters. All right, so you're getting the idea of this. Now, back to the assignment sheet. What do you need to submit? You are going to submit the PDF. You're going to submit the PDF of your contact sheets. So there'll be 4 pages, 12 filters to a page, and you're going to submit that PDF. You're going to submit your final PSD image that has the easel, a new background image, a shadow for that easel, and you're going to put that filtered image onto the easel. You need to have that with all the layers. I need to see how you put together your PSD file. You're also going to create a document that just tells you the tools you use, the filter that you used, any settings that you had to use to create that. So you're going to save that either as a Microsoft Word document or as a PDF. So at the end, you're going to be submitting 3 things: PDF of your contact sheets, the PSD with all your layers, and a Word type document that lists all the steps that you took. And if you're using an image, I want to know who owns that image. Did you take the image? It's your photo, so you own the copyright. Or is this something you got from Pixels? Or did you go to a stock photography site? Is it copywritten by someone else? You need to remember that that's part of your job, is to note where the copyright sits from all of the artwork that you're using, all the images. Then you'll put that in. Now, this is due the last class, May 8th. So that means that you are going to be presenting this in class. I will not accept any late ones, and everyone has to submit this and show it in class. So make sure that you're ready that last class to show this image. Oh, before I start, I need to share one more time. One more thing that we need to acknowledge: when I look at Blackboard and the modules, today's module is the 24th of April. So we're doing the Zoom class. There's videos here if you want to learn more about layer masks, the easel image, as well as the assignment sheet are here. And by next class, the May 1st class, you need to submit tutorial number 4, your last tutorial. Now, here's the part I really want you to understand. May 1st, next class, there is no class that we're going to have, no Zoom session, because you have to, during this week, complete exam number 2. And you have to work on assignment number 6, the filters and shadow assignment. Normally, if this class were held in the class, this is when I would say, okay, you're going to work on your exam for half the class, and then you're going to work on your assignment number 6 for the second half of the class. So between May 1st and the 8th, you need to complete the exam, and you need to work on getting assignment 6 done. There's also a section 8 in this video by Deke that talks about saving images for the web and online. Maybe something you want to look at. Okay, so there is no class next week, no Zoom class, but you've got a lot of work to do. So that's why I'm not doing the class. And then the following week, the last class is May 8th. And I even put something looking good for client video conferencing meeting. If you want to watch this video, it gives you some ideas of things to think about when you're setting up a Zoom meeting, whether it's for an interview or you're presenting your work to a client. And you need to submit that. Half of the class will be that. Half of the class is going to be an in-class assignment that you'll need to do. So you will need, you will be working on Photoshop that last class. For half the class, I have you work on an assignment. Okay, so it's a way, it's not really an exam, it's an assignment, but it does show me how quick you are with Photoshop. Have you been doing your assignments? Are you comfortable with quick keys? So that last class, you pretty much have a timed assignment to do, okay? Any questions? All right. If at any point between now and May 8th, which is the next Zoom session that we're doing, if you need to meet with me, do a Zoom call, talk about your assignment, see if you're doing it right, do whatever. Just send me an email and we'll set up a time when we can tutor or do whatever we need to one-on-one. Okay.
Professor,
Yeah.
when are you going to put the assignment available?
The assignment or the exam?
Yeah, the exam.
Okay. The exam will actually turn on as of 12:30 next Monday. And
Oh,
it will stay on for 1 week.
okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Comments? Anything? Okay. I will see you not next Monday, the following Monday.
Thank you so
Okay.
much, Professor. Have a great afternoon.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.